Welcome back as we continue our study in our series entitled Understanding Leadership. Last time we talked about what leadership is not, and oftentimes it gets confused with some of those items, power or position or title, those types of things. But today we're going to spend our time talking about what leadership is. And so our first quality, leadership is influence. J. Oswald Sanders says leadership is influence, the ability of one person to influence others to follow his or her lead. John C. Maxwell says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Harry Truman, President of the United States, said a leader is a person who has the ability to get others to do what they don't want to do and like it. So, really, influence happens when I impact another person's actions or thinking. And remember, influence can be good or bad, but really it's about impacting another person. And that's really what leadership is. Leaders of influence in the Bible, individuals like Moses, he had quite the great influence. David, of course, Jesus, Paul had a very broad influence in many different ways. So the first quality trait of leadership is, in fact, influence. Second to that is leadership is vision. Leroy Eims said, a leader is one who sees more than others see, who sees farther than others see, and who sees before others do. Really, when we talk about vision, we're talking about keeping the main thing the main thing. I know that sounds kind of redundant, but it's very easy to lose focus, especially in a big process, in a big organization, in a big goal. But vision is able to keep the priorities and keep the focus correct. Proper visionary leaders see all the way to the end of a thing, including the whole path to get there. Several visionary leaders that we can think of from scriptures are Joseph. He actually had visions and dreams, right? Joshua and Caleb seeing the promised land for what it was supposed to be and not for simply the giants in the land. Nehemiah seeing the wall and the rebuilt Jerusalem, right? So those types of leaders are very obvious within the scriptures as well. Another aspect of leadership, though, that's very important to consider and to keep in mind is that leadership is, in fact, sacrifice. One of the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership that John C. Maxwell lists is called the law of sacrifice. And he puts it this way, you have to give up to go up. He maintains that just one sacrifice seldom brings success, and that the higher the level of leadership someone wants to reach, the greater the sacrifices he or she will have to make. We think about Mark chapter 10 and verse 44, which says, whosoever of you will be chiefest shall be servant, really translated slave, of all. And many leaders in the Bible had to deal with sacrifice. Abraham had to leave home in order to go to the land that God had promised him. Joseph was put into prison. Elijah had to live in the wilderness and run from Jezebel. Jesus was led to death on the cross. Paul, he had a big long list in several passages of all of the sacrifices that he had to make in order to lead this new and fledgling church of God, Church of Jesus Christ, that was growing in that first century. So sacrifice is an integral part of leadership. Another key quality of leadership is humility. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 9, Paul says, for I am the least of the apostles, that am not meet to be called an apostle, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. You know, humility is a proper Christian trait just in general, but it's even more important in a leader's life because a leader will naturally have opportunity to be exalted by others because of his or her work. So it's very easy to get a proud or puffed up look. So humility has to be part of a good biblical leader. Romans chapter 12 and verse 3, Paul reminds us all, for I say to every man, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly. Leadership isn't about proving that you, the leader, are better than others or smarter than others or more important than others. It's about accepting who God has made you and doing the best you can with that. Mark Twain said, it's great that great things can happen when you don't care who gets the credit. So humility is very crucial, very important. And we see many humble leaders in the Bible. Of course, Moses, one of the meekest man that has ever lived, as the Bible describes him. Gideon, Nehemiah, Jesus, of course, being a very humble individual, and Paul himself, as we saw quoted from the scriptures in several instances. The last quality or trait of leadership that I want to talk about today, leadership is, in fact, service. Very similar to the idea of humility. You know, the King James Version only uses the word leader or leaders 6 times. The role is usually called a servant. Like Paul, the servant of Jesus Christ. Peter, the servant of Jesus Christ. John, the servant of Jesus Christ. Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 10 points out that he was a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. Service begins with a genuine care for the needs of others more than the needs of my own. Say it again. Service begins with a genuine care for the needs of others more than the needs of my own. So we originally looked at what leadership is not. Today, we look at what leadership is. It is service. It is humility. It is sacrifice. It is vision. But mostly, leadership is influence. And so we have to ask ourselves this, if we want to be a leader. Am I consciously choosing how my words, my actions, and my life affect those around me? A leader always will.